Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the official Colts podcast. Jeffrey Gorman, JJ Stankevitz, Miss Larra Overton. Huge week in the NFL. This is kind of the whole mushroom cloud, if you will, the culmination. And by the way, I hope you guys are satiated after this podcast. Did I use it right?
Word of the day.
Yeah, did I use it right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you were.
Satiated?
Yeah, that's correct.
Incorporating like a word of the week, like, that we drop into the pod.
Yeah.
It's like,
When I covered the White Sox, Chris Sale, back when he was on the White Sox, he had a word of the day that he had to use in every post-game press conference after he started, and it was always some like big word that one of their video guys gave him. And you could see the gears turning in his head of like, I got to get this word in. I got to get this word in. And I'd have to go back and find him, but we could. And
then he just go mow down 11 Ks. And, what a great player.
He didn't do it after he cut up the jerseys. No.
Satiated. Thank you for that. By the way,
you're welcome. Also, we were hanging out on Monday and we were watching TV. I was scrolling through, pulled up the guide, and it said like Super Bowl opening night.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And my husband is like, this has become like the Olympics. Like, it's like the opening ceremonies, right? Of now, it's not just like, used to kind of just be like there was Super Bowl Media Day and then the game. Now it's like there's something every single day that you have 7 days straight of kind of wall-to-wall coverage of the whole thing. So it's incredible, like the magnitude of it all. Like Scott Hansen was up there with all the guys. It's great.
Yep. Think about it, too, then. So the Super Bowl is going to end on Sunday. And then you'll get this sort of maybe slight little dip. You'll get through parade coverage, and then, here comes the NFL Combine.
Yeah.
In like 2 weeks.
Right.
I mean, we're going to be sitting down at the Indiana Convention Center in 3 weeks from today, talking with...
Can't wait. That's great.
Schmoozing, rubbing elbows with everyone who's walking by our table. I mean, that's in 3 weeks.
That is in 3 weeks.
That's like the official start of the offseason in terms of the news cycle is the Combine, and 3 weeks.
And it's right down the street, which is great, by the way. I love that.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm excited about this one because we talked about the Super Bowl and Super Bowl week. All the media's, a lot of teams send crews there and stuff like that. Robert Mays from The Athletic, one of the best in the business. He's down there at New Orleans. He's on Radio Row, but he's also on this show. JJ had a chance to catch up with Robert Mays recently from The Athletic. I want to go over that real quick. I love the national perspective of this team because the question marks that happened with the quarterback. Then you've got a guy like Jonathan Taylor and how special he is, and then the defense and how Gus Bradley's gone and Lou Anarumo. Just give me a quick thing. What was the thing that you were most interested in asking about this football team with Robert?
So the reason why I wanted to have Rob on is to talk about Lou Anarumo. He's, like I told him at the start of it, he's one of the foremost Lou Anarumo guys in the national football media sphere. But why does he love him? Does he say why he loves him?
We'll
get into that.
Yeah.
It's what he does, mixing up coverages and disguising things. But the question that I asked him that I thought got a really interesting answer was, I was like, okay, you get to add one player to this team. What position is it going to be at? And he kind of thought about it for a little bit. You'll see in the interview, or you'll hear in the interview, and I thought he gave a very interesting answer for that.
That's going to be fun. All right, here it comes. Host of the Athletic Football Show, Robert Mays, also a writer at The Athletic, had a chance to sit with JJ recently. Enjoy.
It is my pleasure to welcome back to the official Colts podcast, my North Star when it comes to understanding football, Robert Mays, the host of the Athletic Football Show, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch it on YouTube. Check it out after you're done watching this episode or listening to this episode. The stuff Robert and Derek Klassen do is really, really good stuff, really in-depth. I always learn a lot listening to every episode. So, Rob, thanks for taking the time, man.
I'm happy to do it.
And as one of the foremost Lou Anarumo guys in the football media sphere, what was your just general reaction when you saw him get scooped up by the Colts? I mean, it was only 2 weeks after he got let go by Cincinnati. It seemed like a pretty quick process. What do you think about the fit with the Colts and what he can bring to this defense under Shane Steichen?
Not surprised to see it happen that fast. I think everything about the process, from him getting let go in Cincinnati to him getting scooped up quickly, makes sense, because obviously the Bengals had to do something after the way that their season went. They had one of the worst defenses in the league last year, and it has been a 2-year problem for them. I think you could make an argument that that's more talent-based than it is coordinator-based. This is a team that had a plan for how it was going to build as they started paying their offensive pieces. And that plan involved getting cheaper on defense, getting younger on defense, and taking a lot of swings in the draft. A lot of those swings were misses. And so they were not left with much to work with on that side of the ball. And I think that you saw the deficiencies, especially up front for them this year. And Lou is in a tough situation. It's difficult to win without a lot of high-end pieces. And so I'm not surprised that they moved on, but I'm also not surprised that another team said, we think that with our guys, he can do a pretty darn good job. From a schematic perspective, it's just going to be more dynamic than it's been in Indianapolis, and that's not really hard to say. The Colts, for the most part, were one of the most static defenses in the league for the last several years under Gus Bradley. The coverage menu started to change a little bit over the last couple of years, where it's not as much cover 3 as it was in previous seasons. You've got some more too high looks, etc. But when you look at other elements of the defense, two things that I would point to. One, just blitz rate overall. They're just not a team that blitzed very much. That's just not how Gus Bradley wanted to live. And then the second thing is, if you look at the percentage of snaps where a defensive lineman dropped off the line of scrimmage or someone from the line of scrimmage dropped into coverage, I believe the Colts were dead last in the NFL. So that's going to change. You're going to see mugged up linebackers dropping. You're going to see a defensive end dropping every once in a while. You're going to see more man coverage. You're going to see more blitzing. It's just going to drop 8, for example. The Bengals have been at one of the highest percentages in the NFL over the last few years in the amount of snaps where they'll drop 8 guys into coverage and only rush 3. You don't want to live that way, but as a changeup, it's nice to have. I believe the Colts were near the bottom of the NFL in the percentage of the snaps where they would do that. So just small little vacillations in what sort of defense you're going to be seeing down to down, game to game.
I want to go back to the Bengals defense last year and kind of just like what you saw from them. And you mentioned the sort of talent deficiencies. Like, I know that they missed on some high-profile picks, the defensive end out of Clemson maybe didn't make a huge impact. You had Dax Hill struggling to make an impact there. But when you kind of look at that defense holistically, how much did those talent deficiencies impact what Lou Anarumo was able to do in terms of maybe that coverage menu, disguising things, being a little more multiple in the schemes he played? Or was it an issue of, or could there be something too, maybe Lou Anarumo not getting those guys to work together? Like, where do you sort of land on that? Because I've been getting that question a lot from our listeners and from people who are asking me about Lou, and I sort of default to the same thing you just said, Robert, of like, yeah, they didn't have a whole lot of players there, but how did that just sort of wind up playing out to the Bengals defense being where they were last year?
I think it's really hard to field a competent NFL defense when you have no talent up front. And when you start there, I just think everything else starts to fall apart. You cannot defend the run. If you just can't do it, it's harder to do everything else. And if you look at the defensive line there specifically, obviously they have Trey Hendrickson. He's one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. Other than that, it was in the conversation for the worst front four in the entire league. They spent big money on Sheldon Rankins. He didn't play very much. He wasn't very effective when he did play. Sam Hubbard is somebody that they were spending $10 million a year on. He was on a rate basis one of the least effective edge rushers in the entire NFL. BJ Hill was somebody who's a solid player for them. He was also hurt for a chunk of the season. The pass rush outside of Hendrickson was non-existent, and the run defense was actively very bad. The guys that they had kind of made smaller bets on at linebacker, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, guys that at the time seemed like they were worth paying, those guys really took a significant step backward. So I just think when that's the starting point, when your front seven is such a glaring concern, it's really hard to do anything else because it all revolves around your ability to stop the run with the right number of bodies. And as I project it forward to Indianapolis, the Colts don't have the best front in the NFL, but they've got guys, right? Like DeForest Buckner is a level and a half better than anybody that the Bengals had on the interior last year. And the other thing about the Colts is they have depth. Even if there's outside of Buckner, we're talking about like, B's and B pluses, and maybe Latu gets there where he's like a real impact player over the next couple of years. You've still got a lot of players at that level. You've got depth. You've got a lot of guys that you can use in those situations. And so having that be the starting point where you've got that up front compared to what they were working with in Cincinnati last year, I think that's a significant difference that hopefully will be the baseline of different results.
So it's less about the stuff that was going on in the back end maybe, and more about if you can't stop the run and you're constantly in 2nd and 3, 3rd and 1, then that also probably makes it harder to stop the pass in those situations when the whole playbook is open to every offense you're facing.
I think that's true. And I think that their struggles, I think, over the last couple years were – and it was funny because in 2023, it was different than it was in 2022. In 2023, or it's different than it was this year. In 2023, the safety play was abhorrent. Like it was just so bad. And they put Dax Hill in there, and they had other young guys that they had put in there. And when they removed Jesse Bates and Von Bell from the equation, everything started to change on the back end. This year, I felt like having Von Bell and then Jordan Battle, who was a 3rd-round pick 2 years ago, slotted in there as well, and then they had Geno Stone. I felt like the things on the back end were not nearly as concerning as what was happening up front for them. So when you can just have a better baseline starting point with the guys that you have on the defensive line and even at linebacker, I just feel like that is a path to some different results.
So something I talked about with Lou when I had him on the podcast last week was just kind of having that one call in your back pocket for the biggest situation in a game. And I think we saw that with Spags, right? Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, where those calls he dialed up and the way that he manipulated the Bills' front and their protection to get that pressure on Josh Allen to basically send the Bengals to the Chiefs, to the Super Bowl, kind of felt like that. He had that thing in his back pocket. Just generally speaking, though, with Lou, how does he kind of fit the way defenses are going in the NFL in terms of how he schemes things up, how he disguises things, and how he keeps things maybe a little bit more multiple than the Colts have had in the past?
I think multiple is a great way to put it. Dynamic is the word that I would use, and I think that the comparison to Spagnuolo is an apt one because we've seen what Lou can do in the playoffs. Right? Like when you have these defensive coordinators that are very good at creating these game plans where, all right, this is the very good offense that we're playing against. Do we have 2, 3, 4 curveballs that we feel like we can throw at them to create a couple explosives on our end and maybe shift the complexion of the game? And the best example of that is what they did in that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs in 2021. You have a game plan where you are dropping 8 a bunch, you are getting hands into passing lanes, you create a couple turnovers, and you kind of coax Patrick Mahomes into the worst playoff half, and by some measures, the worst half of football he had ever played in the NFL. And that's enough sometimes. When you're playing against these sorts of teams in the back half of the season, in the most important games of the year, you're very likely not going to shut them down for 4 quarters. Even a team like the Ravens last year, who had a historically good defense, the Chiefs eventually found their footing over the course of that game. But if you can get 2, 3 splash moments based on some fun wrinkles that you've included in your game plan, that can be enough in these situations. And I think that Steve Spagnuolo is another very good example of that. And having a game plan-centric defensive coordinator when you get to the postseason is a real weapon if you've got the right guy.
I want to talk about simulated pressures here because Lou had a really good answer when I asked him about just the goal of it, obviously besides getting a sack, getting an interception, whatever it might be, and just about kind of you got to make these great quarterbacks like a Josh Allen, like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Joe Burrow who he went up against in practice every day. You got to make them think for a split second. You got to change the picture on them. So I think maybe Colts fans aren't used to defensive linemen dropping a whole lot. It happened a couple times last year where, you got Kwity Paye dropping a little bit, you had Latu dropping a little bit, but it's not something that, like you mentioned, Robert, is kind of baked into the Gus Bradley defense. When I looked it up, he ran a simulated pressure, I think it was week 7 against Miami. That was the first one he ran since week 8 of the 22 season. So it had been almost 2 full calendar years.
Like seeing a unicorn.
And that's fine. But that's kind of how Gus wanted to play. And that, that was his philosophy. With those, like when our listeners and our viewers see Latu drop into coverage for the first time, instead of getting after the passer on 3rd and 7, how would you describe the goal of that and why that's kind of become a sort of a trend that you've seen around the NFL with multiple defenses over the last couple of years?
I think the quarterback making the quarterback think is absolutely part of it, right? You want to make sure that especially with a guy like Mahomes, where the decision making is so quick. Can you make him hold on to the ball for an extra half beat and let those other guys get home? That's 100% part of it. I also think that if you look at the best defenses in the NFL, they are very intentional and thoughtful about how they're attacking protection plans specifically. So how can I, if I've got a cover zero look, right, where I've got everybody on the line of scrimmage. So I've got 7 guys on the line of scrimmage. I got 4 guys back, lined up in a line 10 yards in the defensive backfield. How can I make it so I can drop out 2 or even 3 of those guys from the 7, only rush 4 or 5, but the offense has no idea which 4 or 5 I'm bringing? And as part of that equation, can you get 1 or 2 of those offensive linemen to block no one? That's the goal. How many guys can I waste as part of this equation? Because I have an understanding of what their rules are. If I'm lined up in a certain way, I know where the back is going to go. I know where the center is going to slide. It's just a way to make the game easier on your players and harder on their players. And if you're not pushing those buttons, you're making the game consistently more difficult on your guys. If you're going to line up in a 4-man front and bring the same 4 guys from the same 4 angles every single time, you're just making it too easy on modern offenses. And so I think that's where some of the validity of the simulated pressure stuff comes in.
That was something that I thought was really interesting about the 4-man front, is that constantly and this even went back to Matt Eberflus, where it was a lot of, we're going to rush 4 and play 7 behind it, which I think works if you've got really, really good players.
Yeah.
And I think for some moments there, the Colts did have those really good players, but I heard so much about we got to get to Forrest Buckner in more one-on-one situations, because he wasn't able to. It's almost kind of like a pitcher setting up his, like a high fastball, where you got to be able to throw the curveball before you can hit the heater. And he didn't maybe get enough of those opportunities. Those simulated pressure looks, too, do seem like they can get a guy like DeForest Buckner in those one-on-one situations where he can win more. And, I mean, like you mentioned, he's a really good player. Is that another goal of it, too, where even if, okay, maybe you have everyone blocking everyone, but we don't know where Buck's coming from, and all of a sudden now your best pass rusher is set up to win more than maybe if just you're rushing 4, kind of like you mentioned, from the same angles.
Even if it's you don't end up rushing a linebacker or using a simulated pressure, even like front structures on defined passing downs, like go watch a Texans game and go watch what they're doing on 3rd and 8. A lot of the time, you'll be in a situation where we've got 3 guys on one side, we've got a linebacker mugged up in the A gap to the other side with 1 defensive end. So you've overloaded the left side. Well, now it's a math equation, right? For the most part, you're going to have to send somebody to account for the linebacker. So if that's the center to that side, because he's lined up in the A gap, now you have 3 one-on-ones on the other side, even if that linebacker ends up dropping out. So some of it is simulated pressures. Others is just the way you're lining guys up. It's like what your structures look like before the play. So I just think trying to make sure you're doing everything you can to manipulate the plan of the offense in those defined passing situations to put your guys in the right spots, that's a win when you have really good players. And I think that's the task of any good defensive coordinator.
I know you're knee deep in Super Bowl prep, and we're taping this a couple days after the AFC Championship and the NFC Championship, so still kind of digesting those, all the coaching news that has come out over the last couple of weeks. But if you just thought about the Colts, the 2024 Colts, and you kind of post-mortem them, what would be maybe the one big thing you think they need to add in 2025 to this roster, whether that's through free agency, through a trade, or through a high draft pick?
Man, that's a great question. I still would just like to see this team with like maybe a high-end corner, just and the way that they just – I think that, to Chris's credit, 2 years ago, I was concerned about a lack of movement along the offensive line before the season. I was like, man, they just didn't add anybody, huh? They're just rolling with the same group that we had in 2022. And they were right. They believed in Will Fries, and Bernard Raymond obviously was a rookie. He came on in the back half of that rookie year. I understood rolling with that, but the fact that on the interior, they were like, we're good. We don't really need to worry about this after the way that Fries had played in 2022. I was like, okay, I can't believe they're not going to do anything. And now I think that obviously he's coming off of an injury, but I think Will Fries would be a prize for somebody in free agency based on the way that he's played over the last couple of years. So when you've had that level of success, when you've stayed the course, I think it can be tempting to say, we're going to see what sort of growth we have from our in-house players. And that just didn't happen in the defensive backfield this year. And so I think showing a little bit more urgency there would probably be the first place that I would go. On offense, I don't really know what my answer would be. Like, I like the pieces that they have on offense. I like the receivers. I like the offensive line. I think that, we'll see what happens with Braden Smith. Obviously, he's getting a little bit expensive, and I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to save a little bit of money somewhere along the way, because they have drafted a bunch of potential succession plans there. Like, you have Bortolini now potentially at center. You have Goncalves now.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, yes, whatever, however you pronounce that. I just see it. I just see it on a depth chart. So
you can't be expected to know how to pronounce thousands of players' names like that. Yeah,
the fact that I even know that he's the backup or swing tackle of the future for the Colts probably I deserve a little bit
of
credit
a sicko
for that.
Are.
But I think that that area, I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple changes just to save a little bit of money somewhere along the way. But the complexion of the offense itself, I actually do appreciate how a lot of the pieces fit together. I think that with some baked in development from A.D. Mitchell into next year, he was a wild horse this year, right? Like, it just wasn't easy to understand where he would be and why, but the guy really does create separation. And so you have that combined with Pittman, combined with Downs, what Pierce is giving you. I do like the pieces that they have on that side of the ball. I just think that we can do this all day. It's about the quarterback. Like, we could do this all day. It's about what you eventually get from the quarterback. And I think more than any single personnel move they could make this offseason, that is going to be the question that hangs over this team for the next 2 years, 5 years, until we figure out exactly what he is.
Yeah, that's as you said, that's the big one right there to get figured out. And it doesn't feel like nothing else matters, because there's still a lot that goes into fielding a good team, but you're right. That's the most important one to get figured out. All right, I want to talk about the AFC South before we let you get out of here. Why'd the Texans move on from Bobby Slowick?
You can't have that few answers in pass protection over the course of the entire season. You just can't do it.
So is that an issue of a bad offensive line makes you a bad play caller, or it was something deeper than that?
Much deeper than that. If you look at the amount of unblocked pressures that team had over the course of the season, we talk about manipulating pass protection plans. I think you can make an argument that they were the most easily manipulated pass protection unit in the entire league for the entire season. And this happened over a whole year. The game that I think really started like flashing alarm bells for people, I can't remember which week it was. They played against the Packers on the road. And what Jeff Hafley did to Bobby Slowick in that game, in terms of manipulating what they were doing up front, he ran circles around him. And you would hope, okay, can that get a little bit better? And as they swapped out individual pieces on the offensive line. Okay, we're going to put Jared Patterson at center instead of Juice Scruggs. We're going to move Titus Howard to left guard, and we're going to put Blake Fisher at right tackle. When they had what they thought was their best five out there, it didn't do anything to combat how easily teams were manipulating them. In the divisional round against the Chiefs, they gave up 9 unblocked pressures per Next Gen Stats. That was like the 6th most in a game all year. So their worst pass protecting game of the season, in terms of having a plan for how teams are going to attack them, was the last game of the season. They had the entire year to get this sorted out, and they just couldn't do it. And so if that's your problem, when you've invested all they have in their offensive line, at a certain point, that rests with the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach, both of whom are no longer in Houston.
All right, let's talk about the Jags. I think the headlines have been about Liam Cohen that, this is kind of a weird process for him to get there. He sort of left the Buccaneers at the altar, and he says, Duval weird. You're someone who maybe cares less about those things and more about the actual impact he can have on an organization, which is why you're the right person to ask this question. You mentioned this on your podcast last week, that as soon as it kind of became clear that Doug Peterson, or maybe it was Derek Klassen mentioned it, as soon as it was clear that Doug Peterson was not going to work out there and the Buccaneers offense was doing some really fun things, it was like Liam Cohen would be a great fit there. Why is he a really good fit for the pieces they have there, and then specifically Trevor Lawrence?
I just have always wanted to see an offense for Trevor Lawrence where he just wasn't asked to do very much, and that you don't want to minimize a quarterback making $55 million a year, but it's okay to make the game easier on your quarterback. Like, that's an okay place to land. And I think Baker Mayfield has been really good for the Bucs over the last couple of years. But if you look at the structure of that offense, he can take a lot of plays off. They had one of the best running games in the NFL. And some of that is drafting Graham Barton in the first round and having an offensive line with some nice pieces. You get some in-house development from your second round right guard, all of that stuff. But the structure of that running game was beautiful. There's no other word that I would use. They went from the worst running game in the league in 2022 and 2023 combined to a top 5 running game last year. You don't have to have that sort of transformation from Trevor Lawrence, but if you can go from a bottom 5 running game to a top half of the league running game, and you can pair that with a screen game that, in my opinion, was the most dynamic screen game in the NFL this year for Tampa. You have play actions that tie to that running game. You let him be under center doing a little bit more play action. You just give him some easier answers consistently. I think he's the sort of quick trigger quarterback that could really thrive in that world. And I'm very excited to potentially see him there, especially considering this team has weapons. If Christian Kirk can get back healthy, you've got some receiving talent on that team. So you want to go out, you want to add, whether it's with a high draft pick or somewhere in free agency, you drop an interior offensive lineman piece in there with your Brandon Scherf money, and you feel like the scheme can lift you a little bit. I think that is suddenly an offense that gets pretty interesting pretty fast, especially when you consider how much they struggled over the last couple of years.
All right, Robert Mays, where can people listen to your stuff? Where can they find your analysis? Obviously, a big week coming up from New Orleans with your coverage from the Athletic Football Show down there.
Oh, we're going to be in your ears and on your YouTube channel way too often. So we were going to be doing shows. I think we'll have 4 shows from New Orleans next week. We have a show where we talk to our individual athletic beat writers who cover these teams about how they arrived at this point. We'll do our main preview show. I'm going to have a show on Sunday night into Monday with Diana Rossini, just scooping up all of the scuttlebutt from the Senior Bowl, which we did last year. It was always a fun conversation. So we'll have all of those in your podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And then every day from the Super Bowl, from Radio Row, live, 5 p.m. Eastern, we will be doing a live stream hitting all the stuff we did over the course of that day, featuring all of the athletic talent that we have down there. And that will be available on the Athletic Football Show YouTube page. So if you're sitting there from 4 to 5 p.m. and you're just finishing up your workday and you want to spend some time taking in what Row was for us that day, we would love if you would come hang out with us.
Fantastic. I will be definitely listening to all of that. Robert Mays from the Athletic Football Show. Thanks for joining us here on the Official Colts podcast. I could talk football all day with you, but I know you've got a busy week ahead. Thanks for joining us, man.
Anytime, bud.
Great stuff. Thank you, Robert Mays from The Athletic. JJ, looks like cornerback was the position that he talked about. What do you think? Agree?
Okay, so here's what I wanted to get at here, because I think it's an interesting perspective. You bring in Lou Anarumo, you get that kind of number one corner. Cincinnati didn't have the big name number one corner. They had Chidobe Awuzie, who they brought in via free agency. I think it was 2021. They had him for 3 years, and they lost him to free agency to the Titans last year. So I found this, I was just digging around this morning trying to just look at some old stuff. And I want to pull something that's real old. 19 years ago, in fact, 20 years ago, because it's 2025, I got to remind myself that. 20 years ago at the NFL Combine, Colts general manager Bill Polian said, quote, "Recognizable names don't mean anything to us. We don't play that game. We're interested in guys that play football. If they're not recognizable, it doesn't matter as long as they can play." This is a good reminder going into free agency. I know we all want the Colts to make the big splash move and go get really aggressive. That's not how you have to operate. One of the best free agent signings the Colts have made recently was Samson Ebukam, right? Guy 9.5 sacks. Was he a big-name free agent? No, not even close. Danico Autry, was he a big-name free agent? Not even close. Those type of guys can have a big impact. Chidobe Awuzie, not a big-name free agent. Had a huge impact on the Cincinnati Bengals. Von Bell at safety, same thing. So you can make those gains. Now, granted, the Bengals also signed Trey Hendrickson, who was a big name free agent.
Wow.
But just saying, as we get through this process, when you start thinking about this offseason, just because the Colts, look, if the Colts go out and get a big name who can play football, that's great. If they get someone who's under the radar who can play football, that's great. You just may not get that initial pop, you know?
Matt Gay, similarly, not necessarily like big flashy name, probably like at the time. Like, it was a big deal to get him, but not necessarily one that was probably on a ton of people's radar, right?
Yeah, Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
Not, you think back into the past here, and sometimes if you get the big name guy, it doesn't always work out. But sometimes if you get those guys who it's like it just kind of incrementally makes your team better, all of a sudden that has an outsized impact on what your roster can look like.
We know what free agency is. We know how it works. Everybody's looking at the board saying, oh, my gosh, it's opening now. This signing. Some are leaked out there. But what JJ is saying with Robert is in agreement, especially with Bill Polian bringing that in, the Gary Brackett's of the world, the Robert Mathises of the world, guys that aren't big-time players' names, guys that aren't going anywhere on day 1, day 2, day 3 of free agency, but a week later or 2 weeks later they get signed like that. Those are the guys that you stack them on top of one another, then you got something. Robert Mays and this team as a whole, what did he like about this team? Obviously, he loves Lou Anarumo, but there is some, there's going to be some new faces on this roster, JJ. We're going to talk about it ad nauseum for the next couple of months. But outside of cornerback, does he like the personnel in there? Because NFL leading tackler and DeForest.
I don't know if he caught it in there. He said he kind of likes this wide receiver core, and I keep hearing that from people when they talk about the Colts, like nationally, that they like this wide receiver core, that it complements each other well. I think they maybe don't view Michael Pittman's season last year as an indication of where he's going in his career. I think everyone knows the guy's back was pretty messed up all year. Another year of growth out of Josh Downs. You got a really nice year out of Alec Pierce. Hopefully you get more out of A.D. Mitchell. I kind of liked hearing that all of a sudden, hey, the Colts got a pretty decent wide receiver core. I don't know what you think about that, Larra.
Oh, I think that there's a ton of opportunity for growth there. And what this wide receiver core will benefit most greatly from is just consistency at the quarterback position and having more time with Anthony Richardson. You think about the fact that the spring was obviously so impeded because Anthony was coming off of surgery. Yeah. His going into the offseason relatively healthy. Obviously, he had a few things that he was dealing with, but nothing that seemed to be long-term or needing lengthy rehabilitation. That's going to be advantageous because you look at what this group has worked with the last 2 years. You start with Anthony Richardson, then you have Gardner Minshew. You start back with Anthony, he gets hurt, then it's Joe. And then you have some of that rotation over the course of the season. So I think it's impressive that a lot of the elements of that wide receiver group have had the type of production that they have had with so much inconsistency under center. And that's where I think that there is a lot of reason for optimism with this group of wide receivers, just knowing Anthony, seeing the opportunities with Anthony, having him healthy and being able to build off of what were some really positive indications, especially, the downfield threat of Alec Pierce, what you're going to get in the physicality of Michael Pittman, the versatility with Josh Downs. I agree. They do all well complement each other. Now it's about, okay, we've seen flashes of it. Like now I don't want to see, lightning. Like I want to see it all the time. You want to see consistent bolts of that type of production. And you want to see it in terms of, being the downfield passing game, being that type of deep threat, but then also that intermediate range too, which is where Josh Downs is obviously so strong and such a powerful weapon.
I think if we're thinking about like what I saw during the playoffs, and I know we're going to talk about the Super Bowl here in a little bit and the teams that are playing in them, but you did see some teams, the Buffalo Bills being one of them, that went on a bit of a run without that kind of number one wide receiver, that guy who you're like, that dude's getting the ball. They had him. They traded him away to the Texans and Stephon Diggs.
Yeah.
So you can build a receiver room that you don't maybe need to have your Jamar Chases, your Justin Jeffersons in that room, the guys who can do it all, who can win on all three of those levels and are such gravitational forces that they change the way you got to play defense. But you got to have the quarterback to do it. And I think that's what I just keep coming back to with this Colts team and those wide receivers is you hope that the combination of this offseason of Anthony Richardson, like you mentioned, Larra, being healthier and being able to participate in everything without needing to rehab, hopefully without needing to worry about his shoulder or anything, and then the likely addition of some competition there being something that maybe rises everyone's level and gets them to the point where those talents of Josh Downs, of Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman Jr., and then, also hopefully A.D. Mitchell can all work in concert a little bit better than they did last year.
I like what you're saying. Is Shakir the number one option for Josh Allen?
I guess.
Was that what that was? And the two tight ends? I mean, Cooper didn't really do much for him, not much. But
they didn't get a whole lot out of Coleman.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Hey, the quarterback makes everything go round. That's kind of what it is.
The thing is, it's also easy to say. If you got Josh Allen,
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of what the Chiefs have done, right?
Yep.
Where you trade away Tyreek Hill. This year they lost Rashee Rice early in the season, and it's like, okay, who's their number one guy?
So when you have Travis Kelce, you can also
Right.
You can suffer some losses from the wide receivers.
Travis Kelce.
That's a little bit. Kind of calibrates the conversation.
Right.
To a degree, right.
He's the gravitational force. In there, but also if you got Mahomes, you got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, you can get by without a number one wide receiver.
No question. Well, great segue, by the way, going in there. Talking some Chiefs and Eagles right now. Let's shift it. NFL honors are coming out on Thursday night of this week. We're going to have our own little NFL honor segment here coming up in a minute. But I wanted to talk about the Super Bowl. Think about your winners there for a minute and who's going to win and why. But, JJ, let's start off with comparing coaching staffs of the KC Chiefs, led by Andy Reid, the Philadelphia Eagles with Nick Sirianni. And I want you to have some fun with this. Like, what are those guys doing well? Because we've got an old-timer in Andy Reid who's waltzing into the Hall of Fame, and now Nick Sirianni in 4 years has had 2 Super Bowl visits.
I think that's a really good question. You look at what the Andy Reid staff has. They have continuity, just constantly. They've got an offensive coordinator in Matt Nagy who's got light interest from teams. I think he did an interview with the Jets this year, but Matt Nagy's probably going to be an OC for a while there. On defense, you probably have the best defensive coordinator in the NFL, in Steve Spagnuolo.
Still trying to figure out how he's not getting a head job.
That's a great question, but
I'm serious.
For whatever reason, he's not.
Golly.
I mean, it was 10 years ago he was with the Rams.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a tough place to win before Sean McVay showed up and they moved to LA. But their staff is going to have a lot of continuity. They're not even getting picked over. Like Mike Kafka, I think, was the last guy to leave for a promotion, I think, when he went to be their quarterback coach to the Giants OC. So they just got all this continuity there, and they've got guys who are great in their roles, but maybe aren't great in elevated roles, potentially. Which I think leads to you can have a program that's set from the top down by, like you mentioned, a guy in Andy Reid who might go down as the best coach of all time.
You're right.
When it's all said and done, that gap between Belichick and Andy Reid, and Belichick and Shula up here, and Andy Reid, he's closing that quick.
Yeah.
So you've got that continuity on that staff. What Nick Sirianni has had to do is he had to deal with what a lot of coaches of successful teams deal with, Larra, which is losing his 2 coordinators after a run and losing them early on. 3 years in, there goes Shane Steichen to the Colts. There goes Jonathan Gannon to the Cardinals. How do you replace them? Last year, that was a struggle to replace those guys. With, I think it was Sean Desai was their DC and Brian Johnson was their OC. So then they fall apart at the end of the year. And then all of a sudden, okay, we got to go out and get the top guys to be in those roles. He gets Kellen Moore. He gets Vic Fangio. They're back in the Super Bowl.
Right.
So that is what I think is what most teams are going to have to deal with. Most teams that have success are going to have their staffs picked over. And if the Colts were to get there, all of a sudden, guess what? Shane Steichen's staff is going to get picked over. But if you can have the ability to replace those guys, maybe with fresh ideas, like I think what the Eagles did last year was they kept continuity where they elevated Desai. I think Desai was maybe on that staff, maybe he wasn't, but they elevated Brian Johnson, and then they kind of struggled to replicate what they had under Shane. Sometimes bringing in the outside influences, I think, is good. I think we just did that here with Lou Anarumo, where you kind of bring in that different voice, that different philosophy here. Sometimes that can have an impact on a team almost as much as just the overall scheme and the coaching acumen the guy brings.
Are you surprised? I want to ask you about that because you knew Sirianni and you knew him well when he was here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he didn't get out in front of the cameras all that much. Sure, he did. He was there for the coordinators and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is I've only been waiting about 3.5, 4 years to ask this is, are you surprised at the success of Nick Sirianni in such a short period of time?
I'm not. I just think about a guy who, you looked at the dynamic that he had. He was very much like a player's coach, like one of the things that I loved about Nick, being able to watch Nick like firsthand, right? And from like the field and just different things, Nick would get really fired up. Like, and I just think like seeing that level out of like seeing that fire out of your coach is like such a great thing. And I feel like that Nick has this like infectious energy and this, I mean, ruthless competitiveness that I think resonates with that team in particular. I think it fits, you know, Philly and their franchise and kind of what the city is built on. And I just think that now it may have worked different somewhere else, right? There's so much that has to do with head coaches finding success being with certain franchises and being a fit for really the kind of character of the team that they're representing, right? And I think Nick does that. And I think, too, he has built incredible relationships across the league. And that's why he has been able to, as his staffs have, you know, been kind of plucked over, he's been able to refill and, you know, kind of go back in and find guys. And not only guys, but a guy like Vic Fangio who wanted to be there. I mean, that's one year? First year in Philadelphia, Fangio, the Eagles ranked first in total defense, second in scoring defense. They were 26th and 30th, respectively, in those categories in the 23 season. So that's just the impact that that a not only a high-level coordinator can have, but also a high-level coordinator that is empowered by his head coach to just lead that group, right? Like we saw Nick's evolution a little bit, and this is where I'll give it to him too, is like adapting where, you know, obviously like he was more integral in the play calling, and then he's, you know, has kind of evolved from that standpoint. Now I believe it's completely on Kellen Moore, right? Like from the offensive standpoint. So that's another thing. I think Nick has always been always like adapting, looking to improve, looking to evolve. And I think that that's something that you have really seen come to fruition there. But there are a lot of guys, I mean, on that staff. Kevin Patullo is there. Jason Michael is there, you know, a number of former Colts who are on that squad. But you're talking about, you know, coaching staffs being, you know, like acknowledged by other teams. Like you think about when Frank Reich was here, like Jonathan Gannon was here. He's now the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Nick was here with a number of those guys, and the amount of turnover that there was. Like, you know, Marcus Brady is now with the Chargers. And so
look at, I mean, you know, to go back to 2021 or even like kind of those successful years under Frank, his staff started to get picked over. And maybe there was something too, once that staff got picked over, it kind of, things declined here. It's hard to replace those guys. It's really hard, and you don't get that many chances to do it. Also, if you miss one time, you might not get a chance to hit another one.
Yeah, poached was the word I was looking for.
There it is.
I kept searching for it over and over. Satiate, I was fine with poached. I couldn't think of but I also think it speaks to, like, you know, kind of what you're talking about, what works with the Chiefs is the dynamic of a variety of different, like, personalities, right? And just kind of finding a way. And I think that sometimes that can be hard when you have like such a good fit of complementary approaches and philosophies and dynamics in terms of, you know, how you're working with the players and all of that. But when you look at the commonality between the two teams in the Super Bowl, I think you look at, these are both guys who are regarded as, you know, very like obviously shrewd defensive minds who have a propensity to adapt and, you know, have a lot of variety within their scheme, you know, super versatile with what they want to do, a lot of disguise. And I think that that's an indication of, you know, what you hope that you're going to get out of. Obviously, those are kind of characteristics that you hear talked about with Lou Anarumo as well, right?
Yeah. It is similar in that, like, veteran defensive coordinator. Now, Vic and Spags both got a shot at being a head coach, but just those veterans who have done it, they've evolved. And, I mean, look, like, it's not like every defense Vic Fangio's coached has been awesome.
No.
Those Dolphins players last year hated the guy.
Yeah, you're right.
Like Steve Spagnuolo had some, you know, early on with trying to get those Chiefs teams up and running. It wasn't just sunshine and rainbows from the start, but they both evolved. And I think for my money, is like this defensive coordinator matchup is just as interesting to me as the actual game.
I think it's better.
Right.
I think it's better. Like, I'm more interested defensively scheming up than I am the offense.
I don't think Vic's going to get like his coverages like messed with like Tom and Jerry, the way that, you know, Jonathan Gannon's a good DC. He got a head coaching job out of it, obviously, but was maybe a little more inexperienced. You try to do that against Vic Fangio, I think he's going to have an answer for it.
38-35, I want to say, the last time these two teams played in a Super Bowl. I mean, a barn burner, obviously, with a lot of points scored. You're saying no on that this year. I mean, I'm just looking at Spagnuolo and Fangio. Are you saying no? We're not going to get that.
I kind of think it's going to be lower scoring. Yeah.
Lower scoring?
I think it's been like every game in the playoffs this year, the team that's won the turnover battle has won the game. It's like the most boring possible answer, but I think it's going to be a little cagey.
Also, you guys probably saw this. I wish I could go back to it right now and look, but like the number of starters different for the Eagles roster from when they were there 2 years ago. Like, I mean, there's been some significant,
big turnover.
Significant. Like you're like, oh, it's Hurts. You kind of think about these different, but like. I mean, massive, like, shoot, I'm going to have to look at it.
It's a lot on defense.
Yeah. It's a lot
of guys on defense.
Like, you've got, like, your Jalen Carters and, like, an influx of, like,
Braun,
young talent.
Zach Bond and Quinyon Mitchell.
Yes.
Yeah.
DeJean.
Cooper DeJean,
Yep.
The one thing I want to bring up about this matchup that I think is really interesting is how both teams have their highly paid quarterback, right?
Oh, Saquon Barkley would be interesting.
Saquon Barkley would be a pretty significant one there. Both teams have their highly paid quarterback, but look at what they've done. The Chiefs and Eagles have both invested in their offensive line in a way that is like, hey, this is super important. We have got to do that. I mean, the Eagles have probably the best O-line in the NFL. Like every single year, what they have there with Jeff Stoutland, obviously their great O-line coach.
Jason Kelce retires, the new kid comes in.
Exactly, right. It's like Jason Kelce retires, maybe early on in the season, but all of a sudden, okay.
He's in a Pro Bowl.
Their line's awesome.
Yeah. Here we go. Just 20 players who are on the field for the Super Bowl in 23 against the Chiefs are slated to be on the 53-man roster.
That is.
So that's half more than half the team is gone.
I mean, that's a good pull right there. It's a lot of turnover.
With these teams, though, so that's the Eagles, right? You got Lane Johnson there. You got Jordan Mailata, obviously Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens. Like, those guys are awesome, even without Jason Kelce. The Chiefs, every single year, they've poured money into that offensive line, and they've used high draft picks to bring in a Creed Humphrey, someone like that. They've brought in Joe Thuney, who's been all over and, is one of the best linemen in the NFL. They continue to invest in that. And the Eagles have invested in wide receiver too. They're paying 2 top receivers, right?
Man,
so it's not all the same.
I'm going to agree with you. Almost outside of specials. I mean, outside of that, they are spending a lot of resources, money, draft choices, and everything. Even more so on the outside guys, the running backs and wide receivers, and tight end with Kelce at the offensive line. That's a good makeup for success, right there.
I think the Chiefs are probably a little more. This is going to sound weird because you can't look at Mahomes at all in terms of your team building because he's a unicorn. But what they have done, I think, is maybe a more sustainable format for the rest of the league. The Eagles, the way they're able to build it is a little bit different. The Chiefs, though, they invest in their line. They've got one highly paid skill position player in Kelce, and even then it's a tight end, so you're not paying him as much as a wide receiver. And then on defense, you've got your dominant defensive lineman,
Chris Jones,
and you cycle through draft picks there. They trade away L'Jarius Sneed, and their secondary is still awesome. I mean, because they got Trent McDuffie.
Yeah.
And now you
and then
you supplement it with guys like Jordan Reed or Eric Reed, who's a great safety. Like, that guy is not great. He's a really good player, and they just have a bunch of really good players around this kind of like centripetal force in the middle in Chris Jones. So you can do whatever the hell you want with him, and you can't block the guy. So I think that they have such an interesting model where their resources are maybe not what the Eagles have, right? The resources are maybe more what the rest of the NFL is dealing with. You just have Mahomes, but how they build around him, I think, is really instructive.
Well, we saw a couple off seasons ago, Chris Jones was saying, hey, I'm not playing. You pay me, I'm not playing. Finally, after about 3 weeks, they said,
made the right choice.
We need Chris Jones.
They made the right choice.
And they hoist a Super Bowl trophy. I want to start here with my predictions. And I am going out, and not on a limb on this because they're both good football teams, but I got a Sirianni story attached to it. I'm picking the Eagles. I'm picking on Nick Sirianni. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I never knew him very well when he was here. I was gone for a while. I came back here. Larra's up in the booth doing preseason sideline radio for television. I take over Larra's responsibilities doing sideline radio. And I don't know these guys too well because I've only been back in town for about 6 weeks up to this point. And I've seen practices and never talked to Sirianni. So after the halftime, the coordinators would come out, and I've always went up to the coordinators ever since I did this, say, hey, what do we got in the second half? What are we looking at? And I was going to ask them a question, I don't know, on like Paris Campbell or something like that. So Sirianni comes running out of the tunnel. I go, hey, coach, you want to find out about Get the flip away from me. Who the flip are you? Get away from me. So he keeps running. And I understand he didn't know me from Adam.
Yeah.
I got the Colts shirt on in the flag, but I haven't had that discussion, and our PR team didn't say it. So Matt Conti comes up during the game and goes, did you have something with Sirianni? I said, yeah, I bum rushed him, and I took him by surprise.
Hilarious.
And he's like, well, he wanted to apologize to you. And I'm like, don't worry about it. I go to the locker room after the game. He seeks me out. He's like, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I'm sorry about that. I just didn't know who you were, and you were shoving a thing. So, hey, Nick, sorry about that a few years ago, but go ahead.
One of my favorite, while we're here,
yeah,
one of my favorite Sirianni moments. This was very well documented in With the Next Pick, and it was the draft when everyone is on Zoom for the draft, and Nick is like at his house in his basement. He's wearing a sweatband. Like, I don't know if it was he'd been like working out or whatever. But it was when they drafted Pitt and JT. And obviously, like, it's all the scouts and everything who are on the Zoom. Out of nowhere, Sirianni appears full screen on the Zoom. Woo! Like, just like shouts and like gives a fist bump because he was like thanking the scouts like for what they did to like get those guys. It was awesome. Like, it was so funny. Just like such a great moment. And again, like, that's like his enthusiasm.
Yep.
That's what he brings. That's what he brings into, in the locker room, in meeting rooms, onto the sideline. Like, it's great. And, got to know his family, like, of course, when they were here too.
I want to see him rock the sweatband come Sunday afternoon on this thing. What do you think? What do you like?
Yeah, I kind of think like Chiefs 24, Eagles 22, just something like
burner.
Something just like close. And like, I don't know if you've ever been to like a World Series game where it's like every pitch you are just like, it's like agony of like, oh, what's going to happen here? It was like, if any, like we have any Cubs fans watching, like Game 5 of the 2016 World Series where the Cubs are down 3-1. They're playing the Indians at home. And it was like every pitch is just like, oh man, is this going to be it? Because it was such a close game. It's like every snap I think is going to be just like, oh, like here we go. Like, it's going to be like, if I'm a fan of the Chiefs or the Eagles, I am just like white knuckling this whole thing. Now for me, I'm just going to be like, I'm going to be watching on the couch with my kids and be like, look at this like protection they just messed with by moving Jalen Carter around here. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about? I think it's going to be close, and I think the Chiefs win because why would you predict anything else at this point?
You're right. I went with the Eagles. JJ's going with the Chiefs. What say you, Larra?
Eagles.
Let's go, Sirianni.
Let's go.
The only thing I'm saying is 106 yards. Vic Fangio defense gives up rushing each week, and now they got the best player in the game running back at 106. They're awful tough. I think they're 9th overall. I don't know. It's going to be fun, but I just want a great game.
Can we have speaking of Saquon, can we have an MVP discussion here?
I want to. That's where I want to go right now. Let's get into this. Let me get some paperwork going. MVP, I'm going to get your take on MVP, and I'm going to get your take on Coach of the Year, guys. Okay, we're picking these two. And the MVP, I want to start there because I'm going to say just yes or no, agree with me or disagree. Can any of these guys win it and you guys are shocked?
Yes.
Really?
Saquon wins it, I'm shocked.
Okay, so any of these guys, and when I say these guys, I mean Josh Allen, I mean Saquon Barkley, Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, Lamar Jackson.
Saquon wins it, I'm shocked.
I think Joe Burrow wins it. I'd be shocked.
You'd be shocked? Hell of a year.
Yeah, but like
they didn't make the playoffs. It's hard.
Yeah, like you missed the playoffs. Like I think you kind of have to be an MVP. Like you've got to have something to show for it from the team standpoint.
Yeah.
Like you've got to get.
Yeah.
You've got to get in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's what makes you valuable is taking a team to another level.
Yeah.
Like now, Joe Burrow is absolutely one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL, 100%. I think that unfortunately, by nature of
should the MVP should the MVP discussion have to be of the Super Bowl teams?
No, because it's regular season, and
I don't think so. But Saquon would be my pick. Like I think
I would be floored. I don't even think he's going to get a vote.
Maybe. I'm just
JJ.
saying in terms of, the impact of like taking a singular player and the impact, I don't know, like when you look at them, he would be mine, but obviously it always favors the quarterback.
I think it favors, for me, it's always going to be a quarterback.
Yeah.
unless you have a defensive lineman have 30 sacks in a season or something, it's going to be a quarterback because they touch the ball on every play. Lamar Jackson this year, oh my God, he had an unbelievable season.
Yeah.
I think narratively, I'd love to see Josh Allen get it because I think he should be an MVP at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving it to Lamar.
Lamar?
Look at Lamar Jackson this year. He completed 66.7% of his passes, 4,100 yards. He threw 41 touchdowns. How many interceptions did he throw? Take a guess.
5.
4.
4, correct. 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions.
That's great.
And
yeah.
that's not even mentioning what he did as a runner, 915 rushing yards. He averaged 6.6 yards per carry.
Let me ask you something really
Lamar
quick.
Lamar Jackson is the best pocket passer. Maybe not the best. He's a top 5 pocket passer, and he's the best running quarterback in the league.
Let me ask you the question. A guy who had a killer career as a running back, O.J. Simpson, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If Saquon Barkley breaks his record and plays that final game of the season and has, in a one singular regular season, has the most yards by a running back, is he an MVP this year?
No.
Still that.
The one guy who I will listen to was actually last year. It was Christian McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. He's the one guy I'd listen to because of what he did in the passing game as well. Mm-hmm. Saquon is awesome. The year he had was incredible. It was so much fun watching him. The explosive playability he brought to the Eagles, really, you're right, it changed the Eagles' offense. Mm-hmm. But he, like the impact that McCaffrey had last year, he had 67 catches for 564 yards and 7 touchdowns, in addition to 1,400 rushing yards. I just think that the way that McCaffrey changed everything for the Giants last year is different than it changed Saquon. And McCaffrey last year got 29% of the vote share.
Okay.
I really don't think Saquon is going to get. He got 0 first-place votes last year. McCaffrey did.
After that season.
So let me rephrase this. Saquon Barkley does not get a first-place vote.
I get you. I'm not going to argue with you on that.
I don't think a running back has got a first-place vote since Todd Gurley.
Well, if it's going to take 3,000 rushing yards in an NFL season for a running back, let's do away with that and just make the most valuable quarterback.
The thing. I mean, but that's the problem with the way that it's defined.
So, who's your offensive player in the year with this argument?
Saquon Barkley.
Okay. So I was like,
offensive player of the year then becomes like the best offensive player who's not a quarterback. It's Saquon Barkley.
You just said the NFL honors. I mean, before it even airs, that's going to happen, right? Saquon win the AP offensive player of the year.
You can make a case for Jamar Chase, but like 2,000 yards?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. It's
interesting.
It's Saquon for me. But give me Lamar Jackson, Lamar 1, Josh Allen 2, and if I were voting for a third, give me those names again. I'd probably put Burrow 3.
Burrow at 3?
Yeah.
Names on the MVP: Allen, Barkley, Burrow, Goff.
Okay, out of those 5, I'll go Lamar, Josh, Burrow. I'll go Saquon, and then I'll go Goff.
Not too far behind. Boy, hell of a year out of Derrick Henry in Baltimore. First year as a Raven.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my!
That's a heck of a year too.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about these great players and stuff. So many Hall of Famers.
I think with MVP, it's like if you took that guy off the team.
Yeah.
What's the drop off? Mm-hmm. You take Lamar Jackson off the Ravens, it's a drop off. You take Josh Allen off the Bills, it's a drop off. You take Saquon off the Eagles, it's a drop off. I don't think it's from you are contending to go to the Super Bowl to you are barely making the playoffs. I think the Eagles still probably make the playoffs. That might be a kind of a spicy take I just threw in there.
That is. Yeah. That's It was Gainwell and Sanders were the running backs in the last Super Bowl run.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders.
Is 2024 the season of the running back comeback?
Mm-hmm. Here you go. There were, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. There were 6 running backs this year that had 300 or more carries. Last year, 2023, 0.
Wow, okay.
Those 6 running backs.
Jonathan Taylor among them.
Jonathan Taylor was among them. Those 6 running backs, 4 were on extensions or had signed as free agents.
Wow, okay.
Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, and who's the other one? Josh Jacobs.
Oh.
And then the 5th guy was Bijan Robinson, the 7th overall pick.
Yeah.
And then the 6th guy was kind of your more traditional type, not traditional, but like the guy who's become more in vogue, in recent years, which is the mid-round draft pick who explodes, and that was Kyron Williams, who I think was a fourth-round pick of the Rams.
In L.A., yeah.
So I think this year it became much more valuable to give running backs those contracts because explosive passing plays have tanked, and it's as important as it's been in the last 10 years to be able to run the football now.
Right.
But I do think, I don't know, if I'm looking at MVP, like for me, it's always going to be the guy who touches the ball in every
running
play.
back contracts. They're not coming close to the wide receiver contracts.
They're not. But look at what the Eagles did though.
Yep.
Saquon Barkley and Darnell Mooney got comparable contracts this offseason. Darnell Mooney's the second receiver on the Falcons, probably their third or fourth target. Or are you going to give that money to Saquon Barkley, who is going to have that kind of elevating impact on your offense? I think what they did, and I think what the Colts did with Jonathan Taylor, looks like that was absolutely the smart move right there.
Yeah.
Good business, yeah.
Good business. All right, guys, this one I want to have some fun with. We're going outside of our comfort zone, which is Indianapolis and 465 here. Coach of the year. Coach of the year.
Dan Quinn.
Our coach is not up for it. So, Coach of the year. Give me a little take on Dan Campbell, Lions.
Hit me with Dan Quinn, because he would be
Kevin O'Connell.
really close for me.
Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, Andy Reid. All of them, again, there's one that I say, hey, I'm not surprised that's over.
Let me see
but please, go right
Let's
ahead.
Look at the single greatest franchise turnaround that we have seen of late.
Yeah.
Look, in one singular year with a rookie quarterback, I mean, I don't know how you argue against it. And
Against Dan Quinn.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is like, like Sean Payton and the Broncos, I see the argument. Andy Reid, he's there every year, right? You can't, tough to argue against. Kevin O'Connell, I kind of see the
Sam
argument.
Darnold, did that with Darnold.
Right.
Dan Campbell's the guy who I was wrestling between the two Dans on the list.
Which I agree. I'm always going to vote for a Dan. But part of the argument I see there is because the degree of injuries and the way they had to adapt and the depth that was tested from that team and the way that team showed up to play each and every week, regardless of circumstance, regardless of everything else going on. It was zero excuses, all of that. Still single. I mean, when have we seen a single season franchise turnaround like you did under Dan Quinn? Now,
in like year one of a coach.
In year one. Like that's the thing is like Sean Payton, I get not year one for him. Like, like a lot of things came into play there.
The one that kind of came into my mind was Zach Taylor in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
But he was there in 2019, 20, and 21 was his second year, whatever it was. So he had some time to kind of like essentially like flush the guys out from the previous regime and then build something up himself.
Hey, Larra.
Now, a lot
with
of things
Joe Burrow.
working. I mean, Dan Quinn, you obviously have, ownership group, and you drafted Jaden Daniels, and you had some great free agency moves as well. But
one of the most important things a head coach can do is hire the right staff. And when they hired Cliff Kingsbury, I'll be honest, I was skeptical of that, but he nailed that hiring of an OC.
The other thing is, Dan Quinn, as a head coach, regardless of who they were going to draft, regardless of who they were bringing in, whatever, he established a culture in Washington, something that franchise had been lacking, right? Like it's well documented, of course, the struggles that have been there. Dan Quinn came in with a very clear vision and a path, a plan, a structure of exactly this is how we are going to do it. This is how we get the buy-in. And this is, yes, it is obviously the spectacular play of Jaden Daniels, who is the offensive rookie of the year, no question. But it's also what you got from the rest of the guys, from players who had been a part of that team, who had been through all of the struggles and all of the adversity that they have seen, and to buy in to exactly what Dan Quinn is doing, which is not unlike what Dan Campbell did from the day he stepped in the building in Detroit.
There's a little difference there. I don't disagree with you at all.
Also, I'm always here for a backward hat moment. And Dan Quinn rocks that backward hat.
Guys, to go from Dan Snyder to Josh Harris, new ownership within 2 years, and to have success as a program in this league, it's tough. It's tough to have ownership flip the switch on it, totally new like that. So now you got new owners in, you come in, you say, okay, Ron Rivera, thank you for doing everything that you did. Now set it up with another veteran coach, and you get the quarterback, and you get the young GM, and you get the young assistant GM, and the front office is right. I'm just saying, if Dan Quinn wins this award, which I think he's obviously, more qualified than it's the two Dans for me as well in this thing. But as an organization, that organization will get that Coach of the Year award because of all the factors that had to come in and playing in a championship game with a rookie quarterback.
Right.
It's mind-boggling to me that turnaround, that how they did that.
This is probably unfair to Dan Quinn, but I have this kind of lodged in the back of my brain that Matt Nagy got Coach of the Year in 2018, and by the end, but not even the end, 3 weeks into the 2019 season, Bears fans wanted him fired.
Wow.
I mean, it happens quick. So that's why I like giving it to the guy who it's like, you know what? It's been like 3 years of this. And for Dan Campbell, that's what it's been. It's been 3 years of like, this guy is an awesome football coach. He should get Coach of the Year at some point. Like you mentioned, Larra, everything they dealt with, losing Aiden Hutchinson, losing Aleem McNeil, like every impact player on that defense, it felt like got hurt by the end of the year. And it cost him in the playoffs, but not in the regular season.
Right.
And that, like, the inspirational factor that guy has is like, it is very hard to find someone like a Dan Campbell, and I would put him right up there.
All right. NFL honors Thursday night. The big game, Super Bowl, is Sunday afternoon, early evening. I love it. It's a long day of hurry up and wait. I got to go there, Larra. I got to go there. We got favorites now on this big day. This is a big, big day around. And by the way, there is some legislation that's being brought in.
Satiation.
That's being brought in by an Indiana lawmaker to make the Monday following the Super Bowl
Is this lawmaker Matt Taylor? Because he has
holiday. He's the one that brought it to me.
Stumping on
right in the
this,
other room. They're going for legislation to make that a national holiday the day after, and it's literally called like Pro Football Memory Day or something like that. The Monday afterwards. So any of you lawmakers,
it's not called like heartburn and indigestion day.
Right,
or,
you need it though. But anybody watching the show, hey, we want it. We want to push it through. Want a day off. It's either this, guys, and then I'm going off a tangent. Can't you just make this thing on Saturday night? How big of a ratings? How big will be the ratings from a Sunday to a Saturday?
Super Bowl Sunday. Yeah. It's like branded and packaged as that.
But Larry, do you want the day off the next day?
No.
Not really? It's okay?
No. I don't know.
Well, here is where I get what you're saying. We live in the Eastern time zone. Mm-hmm. The absolute worst time zone for watching sports, the Eastern time zone. Unless you're a soccer fan, then it's great. The Super Bowl for us ends at, 9:30, 10 o'clock. But if you're living in Palo Alto, or, I guess Palo Alto's on my mind because of the Andrew Luck interview. If you're living in, Colorado Springs, Mountain Time, the best time zone for watching sports. Game's over at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock. You can...
And then you watch
coming down for your buzz. You watch Murder, She Wrote.
Murder, She Wrote afterwards. I mean, what's wrong with that?
60 minutes. Come up on 60 minutes.
It's a hell of a Sunday. Yeah.
You're fine.
Keep it where it is.
Yeah. How about this? Just for the Eastern time zone, we get the day.
Just bump it up earlier. You could also just
bump it up earlier.
Start a little earlier.
I'm okay with a 4:30 kickoff, 1:30 on the West Coast. I'm okay with that.
That's already a common time slot. Yep. That's already established. But whatever.
I agree. And this is just for you at home. Just think of this, because if you go to places special, mom and dad, sisters, brothers, boyfriends, girlfriends, what's a must-have? Because you said it earlier, and then my mouth gets watering, and if there's not a buffalo dip around me within arm's reach come this Sunday, all hell's going to break loose.
Buffalo dip. That is my, we were talking about like an ultimate Super Bowl snack power ranking.
That's it.
Top tier.
I don't need it much any other time of the year.
Dip, and I want like a little, I want like a tortilla chip. I really like the blue corn tortilla chips. They feel like they're, they got a little more thickness.
Thicker,
yeah. Big fan of those. I also like to have like some, carrots and celery on the side. That is my go-to. Like I could go into that stuff just fork to mouth even. Like if you just set that little crock of goodness right in front of me.
I want my own mini crock pot of that and football,
and
I'm in heaven.
Yeah.
Anything at the house? You got the kids running around. You got a couch. You got anything you're stuffing your face with.
Yeah, we've done a Super Bowl party the last couple of years, but not this year.
Okay.
So I don't know. I got to figure out what I'm going to make.
Fair enough.
I'm just going to let my kids stay up late, and they'll be terrors on Monday morning. But
I want to
actually, hold on. Wait, real quick. That's the best reason to not have Super Bowl Sunday the day after be a national holiday. Kids, you still got to go to school.
Yeah.
I might take the day off. I might put in PTO. I mean, I probably won't this year, but like, If I were
kids,
thinking about it, I'm going to just take PTO that day, but my kids are going to school. You get that unicorn day where you're at home, the kids are at school.
Well,
It's great.
okay, hold on. Let's talk about this then. There was a brief conversation on Monday in Roger Goodell's press conference about the 18-game schedule.
Sure was.
President's Day weekend.
If the league went to an 18-game schedule, that would then push the Super Bowl to overlap with President's Day. So you would get that day off.
Correct.
So eventually that will happen.
Kids are going to camp that day.
There you go. That's when the grandparents come in,
Or grandparents. They're going to the grandparents. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
18 games.
Daddy hit the blends a little too much during the game.
And I'm also sniffing a game in Australia I'm hearing about. I mean, oh my gosh.
Oh.
You guys reading anything about
Yeah,
that?
I've seen a couple reports. Yeah.
About Australia and the NFL, the worldwide domination, it continues. But Sunday night, you got me talking on this thing.
Trying to
Sunday
manifest
night,
that.
we're going to find out who did it the best and who did it and how many is Andy Reid going to end up with. I know the Chiefs are a good team. I'm going with the Eagles. I'm just going to Nick Sirianni on that. And wrap up, guys. So much loved it. I thought you'd be at the Ale House myself.
Ale
Emporium, rather, on Sunday.
Yeah.
Because of the wings and what they do to you. But
I love them. I love them. I go pick some up, but it's just it's so packed in there. I mean, it's great.
Just
It's a great
jammed,
time
right?
if you want to be out. I just prefer to be either at a friend's house or something where can watch a little bit more. It's guys. I know this is really going to surprise you, but I have a hard time focusing if I'm in a large public social setting because then I'm just
you're everywhere.
Yeah, you're chit-chat. Same thing, yeah.
So I need to be locked in, right? You have to remove the stimuli for me to be able to laser in, even on something as big as the Super Bowl. Am I the only one who's really intrigued by the fact that in his first season as a broadcaster, Tom Brady gets a Super Bowl?
Yeah.
I'm so ooh, I'm excited by that. That is the broadcaster nerd in me,
Yeah.
I think. But I'm excited for that factor too. What
JJ,
Tom brings.
you talked about it before. You're excited about Kendrick Lamar and Friends. Halftime.
Yeah, that's going to be a good halftime
Not
show.
bad. Not
made
bad.
the greatest rap song of all time. I mean,
They're bringing it right to the stage. Hey, let's have some fun. Guys, coming up, we have so much stuff. The Combine coming right here to Indianapolis, and obviously filling out this roster. We're going to have priority lists for you guys coming up in the weeks to have, where the Colts are going to concentrate on filling holes in this team offensively and defensively. Obviously, what Lou Anarumo brings to this defense, we're going to discuss it, and a whole lot more. And again, the Combine right around the corner. Colts.com has you covered. You like social media? Watch this. At JJ Stankevitz, at Larra Overton, best in the business. Things are going to start kicking into high gear right now. We're celebrating the year, Super Bowl week and everything, but I tell you what, come Monday, going to put the nose to the grindstone, as they say. Get downtown to the Combine and figuring out what this roster is going to look like. Appreciate you guys watching on the YouTube channel and, of course, the Colts Radio Network. For JJ Stankevitz and Larra Overton, I am Jeffrey Gorman. Thank you for watching. Thanks for Robert Mays for a great interview with JJ. And, guys, we will talk to you as I lost wind there. Guys, we will talk to you next week.